Right, we're moving straight on now to Andy Spence, who's joining us to talk about technology to build a better people profession. So building on what Prana's already shared with us this morning and the need to do that. So Andy is a workforce futurist, global speaker, writer, and working for the HR technology as a board advisor. So gosh, that's a lot to fit onto a resume. But welcome, Andy. Absolutely delighted to have you here today, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Annesley. And in the last 2 years, frontline health and care staff have rightly received plaudits for saving lives, and great sacrifices have been made. But behind all the frontline health teams, there is a HR team running the scheduling, the furlough schemes, enabling collaboration between the different teams. So just a moment of recognition and thanks from me. And it's a great honor to be speaking with you today at the HPMA event. HR indeed has kept the ship afloat, but now we need to set a new course. Prana has outlined a 2030 vision for the future of HR and OD in the NHS. And the way we manage people in organizations has always been influenced by forces external to the HR function. The megatrends shaping our work today will dictate the future of HR, from demographics, the changing society, and an increasingly decentralized workforce, to the next generation of technology infrastructure, how the health industry is rapidly changing. Now, I've worked on about 30 large transformation programs over the last 20 years or so, from train depots in Berlin to futuristic campuses in Bangalore and Basel to NHS trusts in London. And I've been lucky to work with some great people, but I've also seen some rather sad cubicles and underutilized talent. So my passion is about making work better, like much of yours, making it much better. And I have a love-hate relationship with technology. From learning AI programming in the 1990s to modeling people with head injuries, to running employee experience workshops, and then going back to our desk and having the reality that we've got to log in 7 times to 7 different systems, which is something I think you can relate to. And today I'll be talking about how we can use technology to build a better people profession. I'm going to give some examples from different industries and from around the world. And I'm not close to your unique day-to-day work challenges, but I do humbly hope that it might stimulate some ideas in supporting your goals for 2030 and beyond. Now, let me just get the slides up. Can we show the slides there, please? Okay, so you're going to have to imagine the visuals, and I'm afraid you're stuck with the visual of my smiling face today. But what I'd like you to do is to sit back, take a sip of your tea, chai, or coffee, shut your eyes and imagine. And I ask you to listen to this future scenario, okay? So Joe is a business partner and being taken to the office in a bug, Beamer, Uber, Google driverless car. And she's discussing her day with her automated coaching partner, Sirius. I noticed that you had less alpha rhythm sleep last night. I suggest you have some breakfast to increase your energy levels. At 11 o'clock, you have a meeting with the new client executive. She is usually skeptical initially, but warms up. Remember to ask an open question and smile to make her feel at ease. I noticed that Sanjay, your clinical manager, has a different socializing pattern and lower productivity since coming back from sick leave last week. It might be worth checking in with him today while in the office. I know what you're thinking. This futuristic scenario requires you to suspend your disbelief. Firstly, it meshes different data sets that we don't measure at the moment on performance, location, and personal biometric data. Secondly, it assumes we have a robust framework for the prediction of behavior, and we're not quite there yet. And finally, it assumes employees like Joe are willing for employers to use their personal data on movement, diet, and performance in this way. and all currently outrageous. But could this type of insight be possible in the future? Would you want a serious automated coaching partner? Would it appeal to you or your organization? I'll tell you a story. There was outrage after the Daily Telegraph put censors under the journalists' desks. So there's a lesson learned here. Always get permission from employees first, especially when your employees are journalists. And in the digital COVID era, with millions of employees working from home, there are reports of employers using surveillance to recreate the oversight of the office at home. So one big tip here, and to amplify what's been said before, is we need to empower workers and definitely not spy on them. So the quantified worker will be introduced, but only at the speed of employee trust. Now, if we could introduce slide 3, I'll be very grateful. And as if by magic, slide 3, to remind us quite positively that it's estimated that babies born today in richer countries are expected to live past 100 years old. This is from work from Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott. So going to university when you're 19 or 20 for 3 or 4 years, when you could be working for another 50 or 60 years, just makes less sense. So my main point here is that our workforce live in societies that are morphing and changing all the time, as Dean mentioned as well. We could go to the next slide, please. Society is rapidly changing, and so is our workforce. So taking a global view, there's 3.4 billion employed. 2 billion of those people work informally, and over half of the world's working-age women are not in the formal labor force. So there's a great opportunity here for economic inclusion. And not everybody wants to work for a boss dictating our work hours, rituals, and pay. So the job we're seeing is unbundling into tasks which are being allocated on platforms. And during the pandemic, many people have dabbled in what's been known as their side hustle. And technology platforms have enabled this. So we have playbrers and live streamers, people earning money from their prowess in games. And the games industry is bigger than the movie industry, by the way. We've got solopreneurs or digital shopkeepers using eBay, Etsy, Shopify, from selling anything from homemade masks to jewelry. And platform workers are not just drivers, but chefs, carers, teachers, dog walkers, matching supply and demand for a transaction fee. So we're seeing work rebundle into really new, interesting forms. Some of them are reinventing older models. So we're seeing digital guilds, platform cooperatives, decentralized autonomous organizations, and teams forming in the metaverse to solve problems and create value. So if we could go to the next slide, please. This is a photo of a team of nurses in Holland working for a company you probably heard of called Buurtzorg. And they're part of an organization of 8,000 that deliver community health services. Now, the interesting thing about this organization is that it's made up of self-organized teams. They have very little central infrastructure and make all their decisions themselves. Now, I asked the founder, Josh de Block, what's the optimal team size? 12. Why is that? Because we don't have bigger tables. Well, I'm not saying that's a solution for all organizations. However, most companies should be reviewing the best org structures for them. HR and OD need to reinforce their role as people scientists. And one observation from Buurtzorg, you might have heard the stories about self-organized teams before. What you might not have heard before is they spent a year, 18 months actually designing the systems to support these teams. So that's quite interesting about the infrastructure that is required to enable great teamwork. And of course, many of our HR processes are geared up around the individual. And we need to look much harder at diversity, cognitive diversity, and to make our teams more effective. But I'll talk more on this later. So if I could have the next slide, please. In summary, these are some of the mega trends that are driving our work in the NHS, but also in other industries around the world that are going to impact our work in 2030. Now, it's been said that we overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate the impact over the long term. Now, the NHS has some unique challenges, but also some advantages here. Research shows that 37% of British workers think their jobs are meaningless. This is shocking. As a kid, after school, I remember my mum telling us about her work as a community nurse, the genuine care, the appreciative patients, and the leg ulcers and the crying babies. But a problem in other industries is providing meaningful work, but that's less of an issue in health. So to summarize some of the mega trends, we've got the changing, aging workforce. We've got workers looking for more autonomy, more flexibility, and more meaning. And it's a point that our infrastructure needs to focus more on teams rather than individuals. So if I could have the next slide, please. Technology has shaped our work in HR and management. So why do we use the 9-box grid, the annual performance reviews, the employee engagement tools? Is it because the evidence suggests it works best, or because these tools are readily available? Today, we've got augmented reality, sentiment analysis, and organizational network analysis. And if we throw in machine learning and AI with all this data, we're going to get some amazing results. And there's been a massive investment in work tech and AI over the last few years. You might use Slack at home or at work. Well, Salesforce bought Slack for $28 billion last year. In one of my recent Workforce Futurist articles, I highlighted 24 work tech unicorns. These are companies valued at over $1 billion. But for a decent return on investment for employers, we need access to good quality data, which is often not accessible, poor quality, or it belongs to somebody else. Now, when we come across new technology, our first instinct is usually, how do we use these latest cool new tools around here? For example, you're too young for this, I know, but with the advent of the internet, we put our entire 6-page paper candidate application form online. Then we had the advent of mobile, and we put our online candidate application form with its 20 fields or so into mobile form, which again totally missed the point of the new technology. And now people are asking me, can we run our payroll on blockchain? But that's the wrong question. Why would we want to map 50-year-old processes onto this new technology? We've got an opportunity to completely rethink how we pay and incentivize different types of workers. But before we get carried away too far into the future, it is useful to look back a little bit. So if I could have the next slide, please. Well, why did digital transformation programs fail? Well, every industry I know has a poor record with implementing technology. Research shows that 70% of these digital transformation programs fail. And according to the IDC, $1.3 trillion are spent on these programs. That's $900 billion wasted. Think of what that could be spent on. And the main challenges from research on why transformation programs fail come down to people, knowledge, and culture. Now, that's not going to surprise the OD practitioners who are listening today, and it doesn't surprise me. But many programs start with the wrong questions. How do we implement AI, for example? That's the wrong question. We need to start with, how do we achieve our organizational goals? What capabilities do we need? What kind of culture and workforce do we need? And remember, the first rule of digital transformation, don't mention digital transformation. So if we could move to the next slide, please. The move to the cloud, or software as a service, has been a step change for HR over the last decade or so. Not because the functionality is much better than previous generations, but because cloud-based software has forced the standardization of our HR processes. You can't mold a cloud-based system around the nuances of your company when there's only one version of that software. So again, a message to this audience is a lot of technology is easily available and inexpensive to try. And when you say you represent the NHS, as you know, vendors will bite your hand off to get involved. Again, I want to look back. So if we go to the next slide, please. I asked the question, what has the internet ever done for HR? Are there any Monty Python fans out there? Well, yes, the internet has brought us a lot of benefits, from emails to PDFs, but in some ways we're in the digital dark age. Employers and workers know that details on our CV will never be checked. And in the digital age of Google, our data is not easily searchable, where studied at Harvard can mean studied Harvard Business Review. And from an economist's perspective, there's poor visibility of information on available workers and vacancies, which leads to inefficient matching, which is basically why we have a recruitment and staffing industry. 600 million people have their profiles on LinkedIn. So we provide our career history there free of charge, and Microsoft, who own LinkedIn, then sell this data to recruiters. So there's a broader backlash on how our personal data is being used, and this includes the world of work. So we need to build a new work infrastructure for the next generation, including sorting out our personal career data. So if I could have the next slide, please. In 1950, Alan Turing posed the question, can machines think? Well, as a teenager from South Manchester, this really inspired me. And I did a psychology degree and a master's in AI and cognitive science at Birmingham University. Now, back in the 1990s, there was not much demand for my rookie AI programming skills. But there were three types of people on my course. There were engineers trying to model how the brain works with face recognition or speech processing. There were philosophers. Can a computer think? What does it mean to model emotions? And there were psychologists. What can AI tell us about us strange humans? Well, after about 20 years or so, who would have foreseen all the breakthroughs we've had, mainly in engineering? Now, I suspect with all this behavioral data we now have, we're going to learn more about ourselves in the next 10 years than we have in the last 100. So if we could have the next slide, please. So where is AI being used in HR? I'll just say generally, the way to look at AI is it includes natural language processing, pattern recognition, and machine learning. We probably use AI every day with one of our apps, Amazon, Netflix, Uber, Spotify, or whatever. It's going on behind the scenes. But let me give you an example from HR. If we could change the slide, please. So I'm going to take you to the humble job description and improving the job description by statistically analyzing response patterns to specific word clusters. So a company called Textio produces this software. And again, one of their findings was looking at gender differences. And the big problem is that 80% of software engineers are male. So words like work hard, play hard, or coding ninja attracted more to males. Does that surprise you? No, I don't think so. And using words like adaptive and creative attracted more females. So this will not surprise seasoned recruiters. But my point is, we can use technology to get the outcomes we want. However, we need to use the right tools for the job. I'm going to give you a negative example too. Amazon tried to build a machine to hire the best technologists. They wanted to be able to take their 10,000 applications they get and get the best 5 candidates based on the past criteria of success. But the only problem is that going back in time, the typical software engineer looks a bit like me, a hairy fella. So the pattern recognition software was actually screening out words with woman in them, like Women's Chess Club. So it can be useful, but we, like anything, we need to use the right tools in the right way. And Amazon quickly fessed up and fixed that problem, by the way. So if I could give you another example, if we could have the next slide. So many of us have benefited from being a coach, or maybe not like Joe's coach Sirius, but many of you also will be coaches in your work and personal life. The picture here is of CoachBot, which is a digital team coach providing coaching support for teams provided by Sabre Platform. And the aim of this is to revolutionize team building, which is traditionally supported by an external personal trainer. So it asks team members simple questions about their communication style, work goals, and team dynamics. And this is being trialed at an NHS trust, as well as being used by larger organizations like NatWest Bank. So CoachBot has been trained to spot patterns and to make managerial suggestions. And they hope that over time that it'll get more intelligent and nuanced as it goes along. We're in the early days of this. And my hope is that not everyone can benefit from a coach because of the expense of it. It might be 50 quid an hour, £100 an hour. Well, these apps are 50 quid, 100 quid a year. So they're going to get better over the next decade. It doesn't replace coaching with a skilled human, but might provide some of the benefit, for example, asking powerful questions. So if we could have the next slide, please. So the first reported use of the CV was in 1482, when a young Leonardo da Vinci applied for a job with the Duke of Milan. And today, we still use the CV. Well, you might recognize this guy, who I believe is now active in the job market. He has some excellent credentials. Key projects are Casino Royale, Skyfall, No Time to Die. And this is an example of a new decentralized career profile owned by you. This one was made by Appy. The skills and experiences are verified by issuing entities like employers or universities, and they need to be verified once. So trusted entities. So instead of giving up data willingly, we control it ourselves. Over time, we can build up digital badges and accomplishments, and we can then choose to share these with future employers using peer-to-peer platforms. So these solutions are being built by the wider recruitment and staffing industry. And for those of you interested, you might want to check out the non-profit Velocity Foundation that's building the Internet of Careers. If we could have the next slide, please. Yeah, and back to these digital staff passports. So an interim COVID-19 digital staff passport is being beta tested to enable safe staff movements between NHS organisations. I think it's been used by about 100 trusts, so you may have come across it yourself. And it's a great example of this kind of technology, building more trust, automating the checks, and allowing people to move more seamlessly between organisations. And this is where your job and employment credentials can be verified on a decentralized database. So it aims to reduce paperwork, eliminates the need for repeated employment checks, which is an expense and a bane for HR, and certainly speeds up onboarding. It's in its early stages, but it's a great use of world-leading blockchain technology in the NHS. Could I have the next slide, please? I mentioned the importance of teams and diversity in teams. And if you think about it, many of our management processes are designed around the individual. And a different approach looks at the actual socializing behavior of people in organizations. Now, organizational network analysis, or ONA, has proved to be effective in diversity and inclusion initiatives, monitoring collaboration patterns by gender, age, and ethnicity, with employees' buy-in, of course. ONA looks at passive data from actual behavior on email behavior, for example, and also active data from direct surveys. And it can highlight potential conflict areas where intervention might be needed. I'll give you an example. A software firm found there were gender differences in promotion to manager, even though the graduate intake was balanced. So they looked at the socializing behavior and found that they could make interventions such as mentoring to reduce these gender differences. So if I could have the next slide, please. What's the implication of this new infrastructure of work? Well, in some of my work with Don Tapscott and others, we looked at what this might mean. And we see the first wave being that we can organize our work and hiring data better. So we get more efficient labor markets and more trust in work. In the second wave, we're going to have more seamless work matching with more people working in what we as know now as the gig economy with better pay. And society is adapting slowly to this. Even the last 2 years has been a catalyst too, probably dragging and screaming into this age. And lifelong learning will be a big theme too. There's many ways of being paid for our time, our attention, and our data. And the third wave, we're looking into the future a bit, but I would hypothesize that organizations will get smaller when they can actually find the talent they need more easily. So that there's a different emphasis there for leadership on working with nurturing different talent pools and working more broadly with technology and suppliers. And where does this leave people management in the next 10 years or so? Well, I think the work to find and contract with new workers will be automated using this data. We're going to have smaller organizations with smaller support functions. And in this scenario, the role of a people function will include enabling these diverse, self-sufficient teams and using workforce technology, ensuring compliance and that company strategy is being delivered. So instead of using many of the management processes we inherited from the last century, leadership will involve nurturing these talent networks. So in summary, if we could have the next slide, please. How to use technology to build a better people profession, I think, and just amplifies what the previous speakers have said. We need to rethink the existing ways of working and adopt a holistic approach to work design, HR as people scientists in organizations. We need to embrace the diversity of people and ideas, support great teams, empower workers to be more productive, not spy on them, and adopt an evidence-based management approach to evaluate what actually works in your organization to make better decisions. We need to build trust with our employees and listen to their views. And we can experiment with this new technology. HR need to be the new work tech evangelists. So if we could have the next page, please. For those of you, I believe we can share the presentations after. If you get this PDF, there's a few useful links here, which I hope you find useful. And the final slide, please. In summary, I think HR should seize the opportunity to learn new skills, rethink people management, lead this change, and design the future. So I would say, finally, good luck on your journeys to create a new generation of successful organizations to 2030 and beyond. I'd love to hear your views. Let's keep up the discussion. You can follow me at Andy Spence on Twitter or my Workforce Futurist newsletter. So thanks again to the HPMA, and thank you all for listening today.
Andy, thank you so much. There are times when I think I'd like a Sirius sitting on my shoulder telling me exactly how to do it, but maybe not spying on me. Your presentation today has invoked a lot of reaction. Something that really stood out is when you referred to the profession and people in the profession as being people scientists. That certainly got a reaction. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that it's easy just to use a lot of the existing management processes, but I think the workforce has changed so much, and probably in the last 2 years a hell of a lot. I just think we need to look at a lot of the practices and say, does this actually do the job that it's meant to do? And I think one way of doing that is an evidence-based management approach. So looking at what sources of evidence do we have? Well, Andy Spence said something. Okay, a weak source of evidence. Okay, there's some meta studies in scientific journals that talk about different types of learning interventions. Okay, well, they were done in Canada 10 years ago. How relevant is that to our context? And then we have experts like probably the people on this webinar who know their organizations and know what works. So there's different sources of evidence. And I think it's trying to evaluate the evidence and using the best available to make decisions, not be led by what we've used before, and in particular, certain technology solutions. So have an open mind, pilot stuff, test it, and roll it out further.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but there are some questions coming in, so I don't know if you've got the opportunity to just have a look in the box and respond to those. It's very much, I think people are coming through those themes of how do we upskill people? How do we learn more about this as a profession and get people ready for the future and the emerging structure? So they're the questions that are coming in. I think the other thing I saw coming through chat was also, as organisations within the NHS, we tend to apply one size fits all, and we would really love to hear your views on whether this is something that we can do at large scale, or whether we should allow organisations to sort of follow their own course. But thank you so much. If you can hang around and go into the chat boxes, that would be absolutely fantastic.
I will do. Thank you.
Fantastic and thought-provoking presentation.